G2 is the best team in the West. Let me elaborate on why. Last time G2 played against FlyQuest in a best of 5, it was of course at MSI where they got 3-0'd. G2 did win a BO1 at of course EWC. The jet lag and all that jazz, I don't count it too much, it's unimportant. G2 got smacked around mostly due to a massive gap in the jungle position and the support position. The only thing that really stood out as a positive for G2 was of course Caps's performance. He was way better than Quad, but still it wasn't enough to even put a win on the board. FlyQuest were in control through and through, and you could see the usual, let's say, choke factor really shining through for G2. There's a world where I might, bite my tongue instantly and maybe G2 don't win the upcoming LEC finals, and this video is going to be a little bit redundant because G2 still maintain and possess that choke factor, which I think is a really big problem. But I wanted to highlight some of the key differences and some of the things that G2 will have at an advantage if they face off again at, of course, the World Championship. So from the FlyQuest side, I do not envy their practice environment. They don't have any opposition, whether it's LTA North or LTA Sud, which of course bleeds into their scrim practice, and at the same time the solo queue times are very long in North America, and if you get in a game, you don't get into, a great game. FlyQuest, in terms of how good they can be, is vastly prohibited by their own region. They managed to, of course, do well despite that region. If this conversation was FlyQuest being the team that they are, but they would have the practice environment of Europe, then I would say easily they would be the strongest Western team right now. But this is not, of course, the factual state of things. G2, of course, practice against resistance. They have to get good, and there is characteristics that they need to overcome when they beat a KC or a Koi or a Fnatic. And I think this is a very important detail, because G2, of course, have a lot of experience, same way FlyQuest do, in terms of how to get the most out of international competition and grow. And you can see that growth real time in G2, while FlyQuest, you can almost argue that there's been a sense of stagnation.
Like if you practice a lot against the best teams, you for sure will learn a lot. Obviously, it's not like magic that you will go there and you will instantly improve, but you will for sure learn way more than you are learning in NA. Like as I said, like I don't know how I can improve my game that much playing in NA. It's really tough because like you are either not getting punished for your decisions, or in teamfights you are winning teamfights because enemies can't really control the champions as well as Asian teams can. So sometimes it just feels hard to get better.
Yeah. Just last question as well for today.
And coming into the World Championship, the distance between the finals, both in LTA and also, of course, in the LEC, the distance to, of course, the World Championship is very small. October 16th, everything begins, which is 4 days after the mid-season, let's say, end of the season cup that is going to happen in Asia between the LCP, LCK, and of course the LPL. The seeds between 5 and 7, the seeds 2-7 and 5 and 4 from the LCP, which is a very exciting thing, but that's a separate discussion. FlyQuest as well, I think the way they play currently regionally relies super much on them being individually better than their opponents. I think they have 5 very strong players that are very good at pursuing information and playing greedy, in the sense that they're going to aggressively posture on waves, and they're going to invite trades and invite volatility, which is going to give the rest of the players a lot of options. But I do think this is a playstyle that Genji has mastered, and it's very clear that this team gets a lot of inspiration from Genji. But the crucial detail is that if you are not better individually, which is going to be a tough task when it comes to the international performances, then you're not going to be able to, of course, execute on the same level that they do regionally. Genji have games where they look worse, and it could be something as simple as a single player or as 2 players underperforming, and suddenly they drop a series against a team like KT that, of course, is on paper worse than them. And I do think that when Flyers get to the point where they play internationally, have very limited practice time, I do think that that conversion is going to be very, very difficult. And on the G2 side, I think their incorporation of both jungle and support is something that really, really stands out, which brings me to the review of the day. Labrov on Renata. I wanted to highlight really what is, of course, the big differences between G2 and how they played at last MSI and last internationals, and what they've actually improved, and how their performance at Worlds might look different, and why I think that G2 is finally in a comfortable state where I can argue that they could beat FlyQuest. Labrov is a player that has fallen under a lot of scrutiny, rightfully so. I do think that in a lot of important games he has been very disconnected throughout the year, but I do think that G2 is finally incorporating him, and he's incorporating himself into the gameplay. I think that in terms of the role of the support is to gain as much information as possible and be very flexible in your approach and leverage, fog of war when, of course, the enemy allows it to. G2's bot lane for the longest time has been very reliant on playing winning matchups, but now we finally see Labrov supporting Caps in the game and Skewmon doing the same. And Skewmon has kept his flair, his strength in terms of his clever clearing, which I think is something that is super, super helpful, because in that G2 FlyQuest matchup that we saw, there was never a moment where Inspired out-jungled Skewmon straight up in, of course, the 1v1, whether it was like specific clears where Flag was actively looking to invade and punish Skewmon. Skewmon was very clever in how he cleared. And this is something that Skewmon has kind of kept. I do think that Skewmon is more impressive in his first year as a player in comparison to Yike, because Skewmon had a way tougher field to play against. And of course, Yike was a part of a way more established G2 in terms of the rest of the players that were there, and the field that they played against wasn't super strong, besides maybe when Mad Lions, of course, stepped up to the plate, because Fnatic always dropped the ball and BDS could never beat a G2. So regardless of some of the mistakes that Yak did, he just plain and simple never got punished. While Skewmon has played against that resistance, against a very strong field of junglers in Europe, and I don't think Inspired is going to necessarily devour him. But Inspired is a great player beyond his jungling, and he is going to, of course, be very impactful, because currently I do agree with the notion that Inspired is the best player in the West over even Caps. And now let's look at some of the fine details in the game. So G2 very actively, they set up for dives. I like the fact that, Skewmon can adjust his pathing. In this case, he's playing Zyra, so he doesn't need to, but he's on time for the cannon crash. They set up the dive. And I like the play here from G2, because Skewmon secures the play by spotting the Vi crossing into top side, and Skewmon is going to then stick around in the bot lane. I like how Labrov plays this, he's aggressive on the dive. He can potentially flash here after the reset, so he doesn't take another turret shot, but the auto of Alvaro keeps him stuck. I just like the proactive play here, and the fact that they are actively pursuing something like this. This looked very Mickey X-esque, and I do think there is room for slight improvement, but the fact that they are employing this idea is a super big deal to me. Here is another example of something that Labrov has improved on a lot in terms of his map openers. He is looking actively to always support Caps wherever he's going. He doesn't always blind open onto Hans Sama, and he makes sure that there's vision around Caps and giving opportunities for him to just play and posture aggressively. He puts down wards and is already a lot more impactful in terms of his map play, which is, of course, a massive plus. Labrov in the past would often just right-click onto Hansama, and if they could push, maybe then he would move and put down the vision, but I like the fact that he is focusing on the important steps. And this is something that, of course, Busio has done the whole year. It's not that he's going to be better than Busio, but I do think this is a big qualifying point to even play the game in the first place, because Caps as a player, if he's enabled in the series against FlyQuest, I do think that Caps as a player holds a massive advantage over Quad. And I do think that Inspired as a player is not going to be able to exude that same pressure on a player like Skewmon. Another detail, of course, is the top laners, and I think that Broken Blade and Whippo have very, very similar profiles. I do think that Whippo is a stronger laner, and Broken Blade is probably a stronger team fighter, more consistent in how he approaches team fights. But I do think that BB's form is also a lot better in comparison to what we saw at, of course, previous splits. So that's also another big plus. And keep in mind, when I say G2 is best in the West, the differences are very, very marginal. And as I mentioned before, if G2 is in a position where important games, they are underperforming in contrast to how they usually perform, maybe all of these things that I'm mentioning now don't matter at all. But speculation is, of course, half of the fun when it comes to the content making. You also have the neat setup in terms of how they build and crash waves, which I think is cool. Eventually, based on information, they react and cancel recalls. They're going to be breaking Mirwin's ankles, which I think, once again, just showcases that they're all in the loop about what they want to achieve and what they want to do, which I think is really, really good. Here as well, Labrov on recall is going to cross here, putting TP, use a tempo advantage to drop wards. This is also something that we see MikiX do often. He spots a Nautilus, which gives information. You know, that is the crucial detail of how G2 play. You can see Hansama posturing on mid waves. You can see Brokenly posturing on waves on side. They're actively pursuing information. The past G2 jungle support did nothing to gain information, which made G2's side lane playstyle very awkward because they had no information to play with. When I say you step forward and you keep track of the enemy tempo, just spotting Nautilus here already tells you what the enemy play is. Here, K'Sante is going to be actively freely on the wave. Tristana knows the timer of when Nautilus can be bought. He can slow push this and wait for this next wave to come to his side. And then after, they can easily coordinate based on the information that Nautilus was spotted here. Maybe Labrov is going to take the loop around and just put vision down so Tristana can play aggressive. And I remind you, in winter and spring, Caps was often left in isolation. He had to play and do magic on his own, and that's where he either looked bad or did something crazy. But most of the time looked bad because the enemy teams were just better at, of course, punishing him. As you can see here, Labrov is going to actively contest into bottom side and make sure that Caps has vision and all the information that he needs to, of course, play aggressively. And he knows he's not needed on mid wave, and here is the choice of either recalling or sticking around to make sure that Caps can play aggressively. He's freezing the wave, Labrov is staying in the bush, and he's making sure that Caps can play this however he wants. And already this level of dynamic gameplay is super good. Labrov makes sure that he's not on vision, and he's going to look to just recall if it comes down to it. If he spots too many people crossing into bot, he's going to recall, Caps will steal the wave, and they're going to continue progressing the next step of the game. But the fact that during all of this, while Labrov is doing this, Zyra is also leveraging the information to hit the Herald because she's not needed bot and the camp's already gone. And at the same time, K'Sante is pushing deep because they spotted Vi, they spotted Nautilus, and as long as they are tethering to the enemy and baiting them to invest numbers, they will never be playing in a way that gets them in danger. Always play to the limit of your champ. The mid game, the late game, when it comes to everything in between the objectives, plays out like regular lane phase. If you are laning 1v1 bot lane, for example, 1v1 top lane, you're having a ward knowing that the enemy can't gank you. It doesn't matter that the enemy is 5 into top side. Then in that scenario, you need to you want to force the enemy to commit many people into your side to, of course, leverage your information, meaning that you bait and play off of your info as deep as possible, that the enemy have to commit very far to punish you and to push you off all the way. And when they do, this is where your teammates can take push mid, can push top, exactly like G2 did in this sequence. So just a simple notion here, the fact that he spotted Nautilus, crossing the bottom side, make sure that Caps is safe. Him spotting Naut and Vi makes Shimon take this for free, and K'Sante push out, of course, very deep. In the end, the team fight happens because G2 see that the enemy crossed through, and they can choose. You know, in this moment, the fact that G2 have so much information in the game gives them options. They can commit into bot and push the Ziggs off and maybe dive him with the players that they have here, or they can choose to match because the enemy is stepping into their information. And this is something that G2 does so much better than everyone else in the league. And I think this is a key detail that was missing for G2 against FlyQuest. Another great detail of what makes G2 so suffocating to play against in the LEC is the fact that they now play off of the vision that they actually build. When you put down vision and you have deep information, it makes the next play so much easier too. If you understand how to posture aggressively into the enemy jungle and your solo laners know which waves they're allowed to push and not, then spotting the enemy makes the next decision so easy. Nautilus walks out, Jinx is posturing defensively, Labrov knows that he can take space, and of course, Caps can, of course, position very aggressively and potentially look to trade with Jojopyun. Caps is a massive squeezer. Just because Nautilus is into bottom side, he understands that Nautilus, even if he went through Fog of War into bot, requires maybe 8 seconds to get into bottom side. Caps is a player that are going to make use of that. Broken Blade is a player that is going to make use of that. And this is the key detail for me that was missing for G2 throughout the entire year. And it's very obvious that, of course, they worked on this extensively. Throughout the year, I've been very critical of Labrov, and I think deservedly slow, but I do think that he's making progress. He's not a Mickey X just yet, but I do think that he's doing a lot better in terms of course, setting up caps for success, which bleeds into everything else. I do think that Labrov is finding himself, and he looks more comfortable because as everybody else is also performing better, it makes his job easier, and there is a clear line of thinking in terms of how they open on the map, and how they put down vision, and how they play off of information. It really seems like G2 really hammered this home. I made this video focus on, of course, Labrov, but I think Skymond has been the best jungler in Europe by quite a margin, in my opinion, at this time around. Obviously, there's some counterpoints to what I'm saying. FlyQuest Inspired is a fantastic player. I think FlyQuest, in terms of their preparation, is amazing, and I will be incredibly impressed if they, of course, out of LTA North, still, you know, are the best Western team. I think that would be an incredible feat. And just because I'm making this video about G2 potentially being the best in the West, I do think it works as a way to also highlight the circumstance of FlyQuest. Because if FlyQuest still managed to be the best in the West through the circumstances that they've been through with their format, and of course with their opposition and their practice, that just is an even greater testament to how good they actually damn are. I think that Whippo is fantastic. I think that Busio and Inspired have been absolutely insane throughout the year and throughout the splits. And I do think that individually they are great. But I do think that a Caps that has the support of a jungle and support can definitely take over the game against the likes of Quad. Because I do think that Quad is the weakness of course, FlyQuest. Quad has had some good series, but it was against Palafox, for example. I do think that he often takes a back seat on this team. And there's a lot of big characters on FlyQuest, so it's understandably so. But I do think everything, if a series between FlyQuest and G2 is going to be played out, I do think the preparationary work is going to be the biggest detail in the end. These are two coaching staffs that have been very good at creating ideas. But at the same time, if you want to throw some kind of a critique towards G2's coaching staff, is when they get stuck on the wrong draft ideas, like the horrible Nocturne Oriana that they get stuck on. And there are definitely moments where G2 realize a little bit too late what they need to play, while FlyQuest are very good at figuring out what they need to play as soon as possible. What do you think? Which team is the best in the West? Will FlyQuest conquer their circumstances? Will G2 grow out of their choking shell when it comes to the jungle and support? Will they be able to thrive at this World Championship in China? This is a discussion that we should be having and should be open to having. I don't think that FlyQuest is instantly a lock-in as the best in the West, no matter what. But obviously, if you want to give them that title currently because of the trio at MSI, I think that's fair play. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please let me know. Leave a comment, leave a like, and of course subscribe. It goes a super long way. I'm hoping to get into that 100k subscriber one. I would be so proud to have that plaque. But nevertheless, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.